Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming to the third CASL Grand Prix. This week, we have Professor Sven Morgan from NatSci. He's also chair of NatSci. He will tell us about his recent NSF grant and his research activities. Hi, Sven.
Hi, Eunice. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. So can you tell us a little bit about your most recent project and funding from the NSF?
Yeah, sure. So it's $535,000. I have another PI. I'm the lead PI, but there's another PI, and then we have a co-PI. It's the second time we submitted this proposal. We made a lot of changes from the first submission to the second, and I have never gotten a grant proposal funded on the first try. This is my fifth large NSF grant, research grant. So I've gotten about $1.5 million over the last 20 years. I get one about every 4 or 5 years. They take a lot of time, a lot more time than writing a paper, a research paper. It's a lot more in depth. Collaborative proposals, the reason I do them is because I just don't have all the expertise to write my own. I've got some good ideas, but I combine a lot of geology with chemistry and some physics. And so I need my geochemistry friends to really help out with a lot of the analyses part of what we do. And so this might be easier, Eunice, if I share my screen, unless you
Absolutely.
have.
Yeah. No, sharing screen is completely fine. Yeah.
Okay. Am I allowed to do that?
Yep.
Yeah, I can do that. Okay. So can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So as Eunice said, we're really trying to help people get more federal funding, and specifically this one is about when you're working with different institutions and different investigators. And so the title of the proposal tells NSF reviewers and NSF that it is from multiple institutions. So that's why the title is called Collaborative Research. But the real research that I'm doing is, the title is the role of grain boundary migration and water weakening of naturally deformed quartz. So when you put in that front part, collaborative research, that tells all the institutions and the National Science Foundation that that basically you're writing one research proposal, and so the people from the different institutions are PIs, principal investigators, but there's only, and so they submit their own budgets and they're counted as a PI, but there's only one proposal. And this all gets put together at NSF into one proposal that just goes out for one review, even though the different institutions submit their own budgets. And I'm the lead PI, and Dearborn is the lead institution. So we submit the actual research proposal, and then NSF combines them all once it gets there. But it is a little bit complex. And just to cut to the chase, the Office of Research and Sponsored Programs, our ORSP office, knows how to do all of this. So they do all the paperwork, not all the paperwork, most of the paperwork by far. And so it's not that complex. The really complex part is filling out the NSF proposal, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But just of my own proposal, so it is $560,000 actually, the total proposal. Second time I've submitted this, and I think I mentioned this earlier. I never get them on the first round. It always takes time, and you get the comments back, and you can make a much stronger proposal based on those comments. So out of that money, Dearborn is getting $433K, and that includes the money, or part of the budget, that goes to my co-PI, Rachel Wells, who's at Fayetteville State. And then my colleague at Central Michigan University, Jim Student, gets $126K. And what I found to be, I guess, surprising and pleasing about this proposal is that none of us are actual big shots in the field, just to use that term. I mean, I think I publish about a paper a year on average, and I've gotten several, as I said, NSF grants. So I think my work is respected, but on the other NSF grants, at least 3 of the other ones, I've had pretty big names attached as other PIs. And I do think, well, at least I thought that was a big help, because their reputations get around and it just makes it easier. So in this time, and the budget was quite large, $560K. And we don't have any big shots as PIs, because Rachel Wells was actually my postdoc at Iowa State when I was there previous to coming to Dearborn. And so she's only been out a few years and she hasn't published that much, although her work is respected. And then Jim Student at Central Michigan, he's a research technician there. So he doesn't have a big name either. He's not a faculty member there, but he's very careful and produces very good work, although he doesn't publish that much. So submitting a budget for over $500,000, I was kind of worried because we don't have a lot of big names. And so the fact that it was successful was really gratifying. That I think if you write a quality product, even if you're not one of these big name folks, you can still get funded. And even at Dearborn, where we're competing with, other R1 institutions for this money, if you submit a good proposal, you can get funded. So when you break it down, the budget down, out of that $560K, I get 400, or Dearborn gets 433K, but it gets chopped up quite a bit. So 165K of that are indirect costs that are not related to the research part of it, that go to Eunice and to other people, mainly the Office of Research and Sponsored Programs, but the administration, to help keep the lights on and pay the salaries of our research folks. And then I get back a big chunk of that. My department gets back a big chunk of that. And out of those IDC funds that Natural Sciences has been accumulating, I'm actually giving, I have a program in our department where I give, $3,000 to a faculty member, as long as, if they're willing to submit a large grant proposal, which is a minimum of 150K to a federal agency. So the IDC funds are really useful because they come back to the department, they come back to me, and then I spread them around and try and get more people to get more grants. And so far I funded 6 faculty members, I think close to $20,000 or a little more. If it's a larger group, I give out a little bit more money. So when you get these large grants, it does help to spread the money around and to get more money. So, but the big chunk, besides the IDC funds, are I'm hiring a postdoc for 2 years to do the work. My job as chair, I don't get to do a lot of research, and so I need someone to do all the work, and that's where the postdoc money comes in. And that's also kind of interesting because, Dearborn is not a traditional institution that hires a lot of postdocs, but that and I looked at the comments from the reviewers. There were no comments about whether that was appropriate or not. So that went through just fine. So I think that's another thing that people should probably think about, because we don't have grad students, at least not in natural sciences. I know engineering does, but to hire a postdoc, because they get so much more work done. They jump right into it at full speed. They don't need a lot of training. Anyway, then I have some summer salary, which is nice to get, right? And then I've also put $25,000 into broader impacts. And I think one thing I did make a big change with on the second submission of this grant is to really make that much more robust. And so I'm bringing out 12 high school students and 3 high school teachers to the research area in California for 10 days. And to show them, and this will be a 4-credit class, actually. That's a dual enrollment course for high school students. And then they also get credit at Dearborn, college credit. So it really benefits the high school students to take this course because they get credit for both. And then we might be able to attract some of these students to Dearborn as well, because they're already going to have some credits at Dearborn. So that's sort of a win-win situation, although it will take considerable effort to plan and to get these 10 high school students and 3 teachers out to California for 10 days. And I'm not going to get much or any work done during that time. It's mainly to get them interested in geology and plate tectonics and how water affects the Earth's surface. And basically teach a class out there for 10 days. So that was much more robust, and all the reviewers really appreciated that I was doing that, and I put a lot of time into that part of the project. So I think that helped. Of course, if the science is not there, it doesn't matter how good your broader impacts part of the proposal is. But that leaves me with just $75,000 to do all the work, do the analyses, the travel. There's a lot of travel that I have in my proposal because the research area is in California, and we're traveling to a lot of different, 6 different institutions are doing analyses for us. And so the postdoc and myself and my colleagues are traveling around to get these analyses done. And then also in that 75K, there's some summer salary for the co-PI. So basically ORSP really is super useful in figuring out all the paperwork and communication between the institutions, because the proposals need to be linked. So Fayetteville, Central Michigan, and Dearborn all have to submit different proposals or different budgets. I submit the proposal, or Dearborn submits the research part of the proposal, but they all have to be linked with one ID. And so all the grants people at the 3 institutions have to be talking to each other, and they know how to do this. There was a few glitches, but they all figured it out. It wasn't a big deal. And then once again, there's a lot of logistical stuff that I have to do with the high school. And I'm not encouraging folks to do this because I have to go to a board meeting in a few weeks and present this to the high school. But luckily, one of my former students from last year is a former teacher at the school. Her husband is the assistant principal. And so I have a real in to the high school and to how that works. And so, and I'll be going to the high school in the spring, in the winter and spring a few times to help teach an earth science class and to try and recruit students. So there's a lot that goes into this kind of a proposal, especially when you're doing such outreach. To me, one of the most challenging things about submitting an NSF proposal, and it's probably true with other federal agencies. The other one I'm somewhat familiar with is NIH, but DOA as well, Department of Energy proposals, I think, are probably somewhat similar. There's like a 60-page manual for what you need to do and all the questions you need to answer and how you need to do that. And those guides change, not every year, but every few years. And so from the time I first submitted this proposal 3 years ago to now, there was a lot of changes that took place. And so I had to read through that whole proposal guide again. And so that takes quite a bit of time to make sure that you're doing everything correctly and that everything's in the right format. And so you need letters of support from all the facilities and other institutions that you're going to be working at. You have to document every person you've ever worked with over your whole career, mentors, mentees, undergraduate students, graduate students, and where they are located at. You have to give them all the addresses and contact information. And really the budget information is really complex. It's almost like filling out your taxes. And if you don't have a complex tax situation, fine. But my wife has her own business. She's a clinical psychologist, has her own private practice. And once she opened that 20 years ago, we give our taxes to an accountant. Once the business side comes in, way too complex. And that's the way I feel about the budget situation. There are terms I don't even understand what they mean. But ORSP, the research office, can definitely fills all that part out with. So you really just need to figure out, how much it costs to use the facilities you need to use, the materials you need to buy, the travel costs. And so you have to kind of estimate, how much it costs to fly and the car rental situation if you need to do any kind of travel. And then how much time you want the postdoc or your students, undergrads or graduate students to work. ORSP will figure out all the salaries and benefits. You just give them the time, they figure out how much that's going to cost. So they do a lot of the intricate work that I just don't know how to do. So turns out to be a 75-page grant proposal, but only 15 pages of that is the actual research questions and write-up. And the other part are all the forms you have to fill out and all the other documentation and letters of support and that goes in. So these collaborative proposals are really complex, but the people that we have hired are really competent. They work really well. I had no issues with them. They're really useful and they can handle all of that really easily. So that's not an issue. Just a few more comments. How I changed my proposal from the first submission. I think I already mentioned I made the broader impacts much more robust by contacting with Cesar Chavez High School in Detroit to bring these, underprivileged students out west. I think only 5 or 8% of them actually go to college. So this is a really good population to be able to, and most of them never even go out of the state. So we're going to be flying them to Las Vegas and then renting vans and traveling to California. And it's going to be, hopefully blows them away. And then the other interesting part about this, and this is like the last thing I'll say is, you get so into your proposal, it's hard to see the forest through the trees. Is that the right way to say that? Or the trees to the forest through the trees. So one of the comments, one of the reviewers stated, yeah, this is a really interesting proposal, but you really don't specifically answer or have a section like, how are you going to test your hypothesis? And I thought the whole proposal is basically how I'm going to test this hypothesis, but it's really, I didn't really address that question specifically. So, and I'm a scientist. I thought, of course I've done this, but I didn't. So I put in another section, half page, where if we do this, if we do everything we've said we're going to do, and we find this, then that means our hypothesis is probably correct. And if we find this, then it means it's not correct, and we have to look at these other variables. But I didn't really put that in a very specific manner in the first submission. And so I think that also made quite a bit of difference. And what I'm trying to get at here is it's good to have some outside people look at your proposal, which I didn't do. And I know we've hired these different private groups that will write your proposal for you or help write your proposal. And I didn't use those folks because what they'll do is they'll do a lot of the writing for you. They'll flesh it out. You have to give them a lot of the content, but they'll put it together for you. And I think they probably would have caught that, or at least made a comment on it, that you really didn't specifically address, the testing part of your hypothesis. So I think that would be one thing I probably would do, is to at least use that group, and the research office has all those connections. They can connect you to those folks, and they will review your proposal or even help you write it. So that's all I have for my comments on how to do a collaborative proposal, and some hints on maybe what might be helpful to you when you submit your own proposal.
That's great. Wonderful. This covers actually quite a few of the questions I had in mind. So this was very neat and organized. I'll still have a couple of follow-up questions. The first one is, I'm impressed that you mentioned explicitly that the first time you submitted this, you didn't get it, then you resubmitted it. But at the same time, this is the 5th time you are getting this or a similar grant. Sometimes people, when they get a line of grants like that, then they automatically assume they will get the new one too. And they may get quite discouraged when it doesn't go through, and maybe reach out to program officers and say, like, how come I don't get this funding? I've been already funded 4 cycles. But you approach it in a very productive manner and very optimistic. So can you tell a little bit about that process? What happens during those gap years? Do you stretch your funding to cover the gap years, or you just take it easy for a year and resubmit it? How does it work for those gap years?
Well, so you can get, I often go years without having external funding, the bottom line. And that's difficult. What you can do, what I have done always, is I usually always end up with money left over that I have not spent at the end of 3 years. And you can get a no-cost 1-year extension. So a 3-year grant can be a 4-year grant. I'm not sure you can get it for 2 years extension. I think you could, I'm not sure. I know you can at least get a 1-year extension. So you can have 4 years of funding if you don't use all the money in 3 years. But it takes a long time to submit these proposals. And so I often go years without funding. Because once you get the funding, then you have to do all the work and write the papers, and that it takes a ton of time as well. And so, if I had a research team constantly behind us, like if we were in R1 where we had postdocs and grad students constantly putting out and helping you to write, you could probably get it a lot more easily on a more regular basis. I'm always going to have gaps in my funding because I can't keep up with once you get the money, then you have to do all the research, and then the research money runs out, and then I haven't had time to start up a new project and write up a new proposal because I'm trying to get that data collected from the original proposal. So I get gaps.
Yep. And I submitted a collaborative project recently too, and my experience with the Office of Research was quite positive too. But you still need a longer timeline, right, to run all these things. So when do you usually start to put together all the pieces? 6 months in advance, 3 months in advance, a year advance? When do you start?
Well, you don't want to know. So these ideas, they take years to develop for me. And that's because, especially now as an administrator, my role as chair, I get very little time to write. And so I started rewriting this grant basically January of 2020. That's the rewrites, and wrote it that spring. And then over the summer, feedback from collaborators, and the resubmission took probably a year, but I don't have a lot of time to put into writing because mostly I'm an administrator these days. So, but yeah, it took over a year to do all the work. And there's a lot of, especially a collaborative proposal, there's hundreds of emails flying around between collaborators and getting letters of support from different institutions in a timely manner. And then getting all the institutions linked. So when you do a collaborative proposal, it's going to take months longer to make sure, because ORSP, these offices are busy. They can't just drop everything to work on your proposal. So you do need to I think you need months, at least months. And if you're slow on the writing side, then like me, it's a year basically to resubmit. So.
Yep, it takes quite a long time. I'm happy that you mentioned explicitly about the postdoc part. It is not a very common practice on our campus. So do you already have a postdoc, does your postdoc, whether you have now or you will hire one, are you thinking more in the research part of the whole thing, or are you planning some teaching assignments for this person too? And if so, how did you arrange all those things?
So the postdoc is just going to be research oriented, at least for now. In the past, when I've had postdocs at Iowa State, I would put out an application, sort of informal application on the listserv that I have. That's part of my international research. And I've got just tons of people from all over the world. And it's very difficult to narrow down as to who you want to hire that way. This time, I've just asked my colleagues from R1 institutions who have PhDs who are graduating and who might need a job. And that way, you also know about these people's personalities and how they work because you're getting the direct feedback from their supervisor. And so you know more of what you're getting if you basically hire someone you know almost. And so that's what I did. I reached out to colleagues at, excuse me, University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I've hired a postdoc who, and this is sort of a downside because there's only a few geologists here in our group in Dearborn, and to have that person come and move to Dearborn, they wouldn't have anybody else to work with. It would just be me, and they would be alone all day. And we don't have also the analytical facility. So it turns out this postdoc will not be moving to Dearborn to do any work. This person will stay in Madison where there are facilities there to work, and we'll just work remotely. And that's, a lot easier now too, when we've all learned how to do that. So, which is too bad for me, because I'm going to miss that one-on-one collaboration, going down the hall and just talking. It's going to be a little more difficult. But in this way, I get someone who's really skilled and who wants to do the project and may not want to move to Dearborn because he has a significant other who's also in Madison. And so, I get to use the expertise of this person, but I don't get to have the person in place, which is too bad.
I know this is a little bit too much detail, but does that postdoc using the facilities in Madison, does your grant cover those expenses too, or it is just, okay?
No, it's a combination, because the person did a PhD and also actually a postdoc there on top of that at Madison. This person's known, and so they can get a lot of the added benefits from just working there. Some things free, but some things when you use some of the bigger pieces of equipment, we do have to pay for, and we have money for that. But it does make it easier to have that person already there. It's a known person's known, and they can just use some shared facilities without having any costs.
I see. That's great. I also noted here that how you use your IDC to support other faculty members. That's wonderful. You mentioned broader impacts too, which is becoming more and more important with diminishing resources. And we have, although in the US, we have shortage of scientists, but we don't have shortage of good scientific proposals to NSF. So more people submit proposals, and they are usually excellent. When you serve on a panel, it is really difficult to choose just a few out of so many submissions. And I see broader impacts are playing a significant role in the selection process. Can you talk a little bit more about your broader impacts part? You said you allocated funding there too.
Yeah, so it's a good question. And previously, my other 4 proposals, I always took this as just extra work that I had to do, and I actually didn't even do some of the work. I just thought it was something that it was a burden that you had to include. And, but now that I'm a little older, and I feel it's important to give back a little more, and I live in the area, we're outside Detroit. I really wanted to make this a much more important, and it is more important to me now as I'm older, to give back a little bit. And so I've really enjoyed getting into that part of this proposal a lot more, and talking with this former student of mine who was a teacher at Cesar Chavez and actually now works for the Detroit Hispanic Development Corporation, which is trying to get these Spanish Latin American students into college. That's the main point, is to get them, because only 5% or 8% of them actually go on to college. So her main role is to have these dual enrollment courses and to get these students, underprivileged students, into college. And so that was just a fortuitous contact. This person was in my class, but it made a really easy connection to Cesar Chavez High School. And it's made it much easier to get that part of the project going. And it does take more work. And it's part of the proposal. It's $25,000, because I think I'm paying this teacher $5,000 a year salary. And then all the transport costs, logistical support to bring out 10 or 12 high school students and 3 high school teachers for almost 2 weeks. We're going to be staying at a research station in California, and that's room and board, but all the transportation costs. So it's, it's $25,000 total. So it's not cheap. But I think doing it thoroughly, and I think like you're right, Eunice, that people are looking at these broader impacts more seriously now, and they could see that I took this much more seriously, or at least that's my interpretation. I don't know, but I had all the details in there about names of people I'm working with and dates, and so and all the reviewers commented on how this part of it looked really good. So I do think it helped the proposal. I don't know how much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, tying this back to something that you just said, now the bigger grants, we are not an R1 institution, so they are not usually just rely on research. They are a combination of research, teaching, and programs. Like STEM proposal we talked about a few weeks ago. It has a huge program component. And the grants we talked with Sally a couple of weeks ago, where she does tons of programming in the Metro Detroit area. So I feel like these are becoming more research, teaching, and program component together. So what do you feel about that combination? You already said something about that, but with people, this just research mindset, proposals can be a little bit more comprehensive than that, right?
Well, I'm not sure I know how to answer that. The only part that's really more, this is a research proposal that competes with all the other R1 institutions for research dollars. So it's not really a combined sort of programming or programmatic proposal. But the broader impacts is where I'm doing sort of the additional stuff besides the research. So I have such little bandwidth to do my research. Although this broader impacts has brought me into dual enrollment courses and programs that offer that and trying to increase that. So I am sort of using this money and this project to reach out a little bit more. But that's simply on my own. This is a research proposal. So it's not a combined proposal that way.
I see. Yep. No, very good. Yeah, broader impacts are becoming more and more important. And not only to secure funding, just this work has to be done, like the work you are doing with these high school students. So that's really good. So it's not for the purpose of securing funding. It is because a very serious need for these underserved areas. Great. I'll turn it to Antonios for a second, in case he has any questions. If no problem with that, Antonios.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sven, for this helpful discussion, and I really appreciated the comments about the postdoc, and thanks to Yunus for hosting. I have a question regarding data potential experiences you might have had with data sharing agreements with multiple institutions, where you have to work with essentially a third party. How have you, if you have set up a data use agreement where Dearborn was served as a PI, the primary institution, how did you set this up, please?
So, well, if I understand the question correctly, Antonios, the people I work with at these institutions, I've actually, the other PI I've known for 35 years. We were grad students together, a long time ago. So he and I just share data freely. It's not like there needs to be an agreement. We know how to work together really well. But I could see where that might be an issue if different institutions need to publish their own papers. So that probably would have to be worked out ahead of time a little bit. If you don't, if you're working with someone who you're not as familiar with, then that might be something you need to work out with. Like, this part of the data will be yours, this part of the data will be ours. Some sort of a more formal agreement. I have never had an issue like that because I know these people so well, and we just, we know how to write papers together. So the other thing, though, that NSF is becoming more adamant about is how you're going to share your data to the general public. And so we have to make all our data freely available when it's federally funded. And my discipline, geology, has been coming up with a more of a cloud-based way of posting all our data. So we did have to have a statement. That's one of the statements you have to have, is how are you going to make your data available? And of course you can say, you know, you're not going to make it available for 3 or 4 years or 5 years until you publish it all. So, but you do have to have a method that is up to date. You know, you're not just going to be storing your data on your computer laptop somewhere. You have to know how to be able to share this with other people eventually. So that has to be part of your proposal. I hope I answered your question.
This is a unique experience that I'm having. It's some healthcare data due to the pandemic that they're sensitive HIPAA information. So there's no public sharing expectation. And there is indeed the cloud-based sharing approach. So the data, I don't get the data, I connect to a remote desktop, and that's how everyone connects to the remote desktop. But that seems to have been an issue with the research office that has stalled projects, and I'm trying to see how maybe others might have worked around this third data sharing agreement with third parties. But you mentioned that you were indicating which data would each different institution work with. So maybe that's the way to go about this.
Yeah, and just don't be afraid to ask questions of administrators at different places. You know, you just have to get the answers. And so these are good questions you have, and I think you just keep asking. You know, because I'm not quite as familiar with using healthcare data. That's a little bit different. But I just keep prying the research offices about how to do it.
Yeah, I definitely persistence will overcome resistance.
Yes, because there's so much, you get so many roadblocks, little ones all the time about putting a huge proposal together like this, that it is an effort. It is perseverance, right? You just have to keep on plugging along.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
And I'll give a shout out to our Office of Research too. Although we are a small institution, small campus, the fact that they collaborate with U of M and the huge research operation there has been really beneficial. With a similar proposal this past summer, I submitted with 3 other R1 institutions. I think our Office of Research was the most knowledgeable, not immediately at the Dearborn scale, but the things they could get from Ann Arbor and get answers for certain tricky questions like this, reaching out to folks in Ann Arbor. They manage quite a bit of these sorts of things. And I think our colleagues in Dearborn, they have easy access to that information when they reach out to their colleagues in Ann Arbor. So I really benefit from that. And our Dearborn office does a great job to find answers if they don't know something, how something works. Wonderful. Sven, my last question to you, this is the question I asked all our previous speakers too on this series. One thing we hear from faculty members, either junior faculty members or other folks, the return of this to them. For a junior faculty member, getting a grant is good for their tenure and promotion, although not necessary to build up their research agenda and so on. But it is a lot of effort too. So what makes you to keep doing this? As you said, you spend few hours here and there to work on this for a long period of time. You mentioned that you get summer salary, but it is, if you don't mind, I'll, based on mine, at least it is in my case, it is usually negligible. Like you don't really, it's never an incentive to work this much on something like this. And you are already a full professor, you are our NetSci chair. So what makes you to keep pushing in that direction?
Well, it's, you know, it's my passion for the research. It's you're right, the salary, it's a funny question. I actually put in no summer salary initially in my first time around talking to the budget people here at ORSP. because I knew my budget was over $500,000, and I was very worried that this was way too expensive for a proposal from Dearborn. So I didn't put in any summer salary initially, and they made me put in the summer salary simply because if you don't, then it looks like we have to cost share. Then Dearborn has to cover the time you're going to be spending on the grant. So they made me put in my summer salary, which I'm happy about, right? I don't mind getting additional money, but obviously that's not the reason I'm submitting these proposals is for the money. It's bottom line, I love what I do. I love my research. It's amazing to me. And, it's so exciting to me, right? The administrative role I have is gratifying and on a certain level, and I like to try and help people with their careers and to keep our science faculty moving forward. But I don't get as jazzed as I do when I do some of this research. And, those are real highs. And to be able to travel out west and to collect these rocks, and these rocks are, they're 500,000 years old, and they cross the Cambrian boundary, which is, where the first life forms existed with hard body parts. So there are fossils out there of the first of evolution, really, right? A major step in evolution. And so the rocks are great. It's the research. It's the passion I have for what the money allows you to do that, right? The money allows you to get your work done. Because without that, I could work locally, but I couldn't do anywhere near, because the machine costs and the postdoc and everything, there's just no way I could do anywhere near level of research without the kind of money that I was asking for. So.
Thanks a lot for that. That's why I really enjoy having these conversations, to see that passion there, within our colleagues, and it reminds each one of us, we all, whether we have that running scholarly agenda, research volume right now or not, but for all of us, at some point it was there and it was burning, and keeping it alive, even if it is less effort, like not as much as effort we want, keeping it steady going, finding different ways to support it, either hiring postdocs, undergrads, graduate students. If there's an intent, there's a way of figuring that out. And that's what I love about these get-togethers, that it is still out there. And that's the main driving force, not any other recognition or dollar amounts. Thank you very 100%. Much, Sven. Yeah,
100%.
Thanks a lot for sharing your experience with the grant and also your passion and why you do this at the end. That was very encouraging and motivating. Thanks everyone for joining us. I will go ahead and stop the recording here. I hope you will find this recording and interview helpful with your efforts in the future, and feel free to reach out to any one of us if you need to know more, if you want to know more about this process and how to have access to certain resources. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.